5 on 20 News, where the news is off its rocker and the newscasters are off the charts.
With Jeff Weber
and Zaira Olivier.
Coming to you live from our studio in downtown Tucson. First, the local headlines. Congressman Raul Grijalva has decided to skip the inauguration. He joins over 35 lawmakers in taking a stand on the president-elect's big day. Grijalva, who represents Arizona's 3rd District, said the decision is an act of defiance, not disrespect to the office. He said that Trump has disrespected millions of Americans, and it wouldn't be right to appear to show support to this type of behavior. Grijalva, who instead will spend Inauguration Day with constituents from Tucson and the surrounding area, including activists and seniors. He will discuss issues such as climate change, immigration policy, and those teenagers and their hippie-hop music. The decision is hardly surprising for Grijalva, long known as a leader of progressive politics in the U.S. He was the first member of Congress to endorse Bernie Sanders for president and opposes Republican plans to repeal the Affordable Care Act. While he says he is content with his decision, Grijalva might regret missing Three Doors Down performed here without you in person. Maybe, maybe not.
The State Health Department is asking that Arizona legislators allow them to lease section of the state's mental hospital. Arizona Department of Health Services Director Kara Christ wants to create a public-private partnership. She is hoping to lease some of the hospitals along with 93 acres of grounds to businesses in the area. Christ plans to create a center of psychiatric excellence on the grounds. Space at the hospital could also include urgent care, emergency rooms, observation rooms, and outpatient behavioral services, or it could just house a Starbucks.
But maybe the state hospital should use their spare space to provide a home for members of the medical board instead. Cronkite News reported that 1,000 doctors were accused of overprescribing patients. Many of those doctors have been previously reprimanded for the same offense. In 16 years, only 250 doctors have lost their licenses out of 19 doctors licensed to prescribe drugs. But this new report found that this is because doctors are seldom hit with penalties and licenses are rarely revoked in our state. Cronkite used records from the Arizona Medical Board, the Arizona Board of Physician Assistants, and the Arizona Board of Osteopathic Examiners to compile their report. And the data shows that many doctors still practice despite receiving several reprimands for overprescribing drugs such as Oxycontin, Vicodin, Percocet, Dilaudid, and other opiates for profit. Arizona has a database to track overprescribing doctors called the Controlled Substances Prescription Monitoring Program. However, the database can't be accessed unless there is an open case against a doctor. The DEA has a similar database, but the agency is stretched too thin to keep track of overprescriptions. They say there are too many doctors to properly monitor the issue, and it usually takes 3 to 4 years to identify criminal action in the medical profession. Doug Coleman, a Phoenix special agent for the DEA, says overprescribing doctors usually falls into 2 groups: rogue doctors and doctors who are pressured by their patients and pharmaceutical companies. They say that many of these doctors are basically drug dealers, with some writing 200 to 300 prescriptions per day. On the upside, suddenly more juvenile delinquents have been inspired to attend medical school.
If you bought milk in Arizona in the past 14 years, you might be entitled to some money, and no, it's not from the lactophiliacs. Arizona is one in 15 states involved in a class action lawsuit that accused the milk industry of price fixing. Rather than fight the case in court, milk producers settled for $52 million, which will be parceled out to those who purchase milk in one of the affected areas. To be eligible, you would have needed to purchase a milk product, including cream cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, milk, or butter. The amount of money doled out for each person depends on how many sign up for the class action suit. It's estimated that the payout will be somewhere between $45 and $70. But you do have to fill out the form before January 31st if you want to receive that sweet milk money. You can register at www.boughtmilk.com.
The chief of the Tucson Police Department will meet with the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, this week to discuss de-escalation techniques for Tucson law enforcement. Chief Chris Magnus says that the new techniques are needed because 1 out of every 8 calls the department gets involved someone in a mental health crisis. The meeting comes at a time of high tension between citizens and law enforcement after a series of police-involved killings across the country. Magnus says that there are many options to de-escalate a situation, especially when someone is armed with a knife or other weapon other than a gun. Magnus and Ryan will discuss techniques practiced by Janesville Police Department in Wisconsin, the Speaker of the House's home state. The department has received praise for the developing nonverbal communication skills, active listening, and repositioning tactics that other options aren't working, when other options are not working.
Mortgage rates across southern Arizona are on the rise. The National Association of Realtors says the average mortgage payment in Pima, Cochise, and Santa Cruz counties increased 8.9% since October 2016. Earlier this month, overall mortgage rates rose to 4.2% from 3.5%, partially because of interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve. The National Association of Realtors predicts that mortgage rates could rise as high as 5% within the next 2 years. But they say that high mortgage rates does not always correspond to lower home sales, so the metric may not impact the local economy as much as it might seem.
The state of Arizona is planning to sue the blood testing company Theranos Incorporated for producing inaccurate test results. Attorney General Mark Brnovich is seeking legal counsel in the case, which accuses Theranos of violating the Arizona Consumer Fraud Act. Brnovich says the company ran a scheme of deceptive acts and misrepresentations made to Arizona consumers. This would be the first time that a state government sued a blood testing company ever. Theranos also faces a lawsuit by Walgreens, who partnered with the company in 2013 to offer in-store blood tests in various locations. The Arizona Department of Health Services says that Theranos lab in Scottsdale frequently failed to meet regulations before the lab shut down. Theranos was a long favorite of Arizona politicians and had a lot of influence over lawmakers. The company's founder, Elizabeth Holmes, lobbied a bill later signed by Governor Doug Ducey. It allowed Arizona residents to get a blood test without a doctor's order, and yet Theranos ran into problems over the years, resulting in the company laying off half its staff and closing most of its lab operations. Now in national and international news.
Chelsea Manning has been rescued by President Obama. Last week, we reported that Manning was on the short list to receive a commutation of her 35-year sentence, and it seemed Obama came through with clemency in the final days of his presidency. Manning was imprisoned after she leaked documents and video footage to WikiLeaks, who then ran the leaked material on their website. Her sentence for espionage was 10 times longer than any other in recent whistleblower history. Edward Snowden, a leaker who is exiled in Russia, tweeted his support for Manning's release last week, telling Obama that if you grant only one act of clemency as you exit the White House, please free Chelsea Manning. You alone can save her life. Manning is set to be free from prison in May.
The president-elect actually gave a real interview yesterday, and it involved more than 140 characters. Trump talked to the German publication Bild, and as per usual, he covered about 1,000 topics in less than 5 minutes. He started by criticizing Russian sanctions imposed by the U.S. after the invasion of Crimea. Trump suggested easing the sanctions in exchange for Russia reducing its nuclear arsenal. After reading the interview, Vladimir Putin reportedly shook his head and softly rubbed an old VHS tape labeled "shower." Trump also spoke up about German Chancellor Angela Merkel's policies on allowing refugees into the country, calling them catastrophic. Merkel refused to respond, saying that she won't release a statement until Trump becomes president. After Inauguration Day, she plans to challenge him to an arm wrestling match. Trump then moved on to his favorite new subject, NATO. The president-elect called the military partnership obsolete because it was designed many, many years ago. Expanding upon this logic, he also said that America is obsolete, along with democracy, modern society, and fire, since they were all designed many, many years ago. Trump also suggested that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, would be able to create a two-state solution in the Middle East because he's, quote, such a good guy. He knew that's all it took to bring, who knew that's all it took to bring peace to the Middle East? If we knew that, we would have sent Tom Hanks over there years ago. Finally, Trump raised the issue of Brexit and said that it would be a, quote, great thing because it would close borders and solve the immigration issue in the UK. Keep in mind, this is a guy who also thought a video game based on real estate was a great thing.
Turkish police have captured the suspected shooter of a Turkish nightclub that killed 39 people on New Year's Eve. Abdul Kadir Masharipov was caught in Turkey's Esenyurt suburb on Monday, where he was with his 4-year-old son at the home of a Kyrgyz friend. The friend was arrested along with 3 other women. Masharipov was identified as an Islamic State member by Turkish media and was said to have changed his name to Ebu Mohammed Horasani because it was easier to pronounce. Turkish media reported that the suspect rented an apartment in the Turkish city of Konya, where he lived with his wife and 2 children. On December 15th, Masharipov arrived in Istanbul just 15 days before the attack.
Human trafficking cases in Florida increased more than 50% in 2016. The Florida Department of Children and Families says that there were 1,892 reports of human trafficking this year, a 54% increase from the year before. The department says that the increase in reports was due partly to increased training and screening tools to discover human trafficking. This training was provided to first responders and child welfare workers in the state. DCF Secretary Mike Carroll said that the state should continue these services to uncover further human trafficking and increase awareness of the problem. Last month, the UN released a report finding that 3/4 of all human trafficking cases around the world involved young girls and women used for sexual slavery. The other quarter were boys and men used as soldiers and slaves. Florida separates its human trafficking cases into 3 categories: those used for sexual exploitation, those forced into adult entertainment clubs, and those used for labor trafficking.
Racial tensions heated up on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, 2 days after Donald Trump engaged in a battle with civil rights leader Representative John Lewis. Trump met with Martin Luther King Jr. III on Monday at Trump Tower to discuss racial issues in the U.S. King said the 2 men had a very constructive meeting, and he seeks to be a bridge builder between Black America and Trump. Let me say, you have your work cut out for you, Marty, because that's a huge bridge to build. When asked about the tensions with Lewis, King declined to criticize Trump, but said that in the heat of emotion, a lot of things get said on both sides, or tweeted in Trump's case. Lewis said last week that he would skip Trump's inauguration along with over 35 other lawmakers and pretty much the entire entertainment industry besides Toby Keith and Three Doors Down, who mostly are just looking forward to a free meal. On Monday, Lewis spoke at a breakfast in Miami about Martin Luther King Jr.'s accomplishments. He didn't address the fight with the president-elect, but Lewis seemed to hint at Trump when he said the quote, "You must never, ever hate," a statement that this president-elect disagreed with since hate is what got him into the White House. Martin Luther King III left Trump Tower after about an hour. I can only imagine that Trump ended the meeting by expressing praise for Martin Luther King Jr.'s involvement in the Underground Railroad and his contributions to ending slavery.
A report by Oxfam found that 8 of the richest individuals have as much wealth as the 3.6 billion poorest people in the world. Officials from Oxfam said that the report shows that the gap between the rich and the poor was, quote, far greater than feared. The richest 8 figures include Americans Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, American CEO Jeff Bezos, and Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Littlewood of the free market think tank Institute of Economic Affairs criticized the report. He said that the Oxfam is strangely preoccupied with the rich for an anti-poverty charity. Littlewood said that Oxfam should instead focus on opportunities for growth, such as easing taxes on the richest 8 people in the world. Ben Southwood of the similar-minded Adam Smith Institute said that the poor's lifestyle is improving each year and that Oxfam misinterpreted the results. Southwood's plan to move to Haiti next year to enjoy the improved lifestyles of the poor. Oxfam's report was released in the same week that the World Economic Forum begins in Davos, Switzerland. The annual event is often looked at as a gathering of the world's richest and most powerful. Needless to say, Oxfam was not invited this year.
An Australian environmental group has photos of Japanese vessels holding killed whales near Antarctica. Anti-whaling group Sea Shepherd provided the photos to the Australian government. The pictures show the Japanese ship inside the Australian whale sanctuary. Inside the boat is a dead minke whale, which the boat's crew tried to cover up with a tarp when they noticed they were being photographed. The Australian government condemned the Japanese government for allowing whale hunting to continue. This came 2 days after the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Sydney for a conference to increase military ties with Australia. Commercial whaling was outlawed by a global agreement in 1985, but left open some exceptions for Japan to hunt for scientific research. However, Australia opposes all types of whale hunting, including those for scientific research. In 2014, an Australian court declared that Japan's whaling operations are illegal and should end. Japan suspended its whaling program for 1 year following the ruling, but continued in 2015 under the auspices of scientific research. The research involved trying to scientifically prove how much money could be made from whale blubber.
Muslim families across the U.S. are claiming the FBI carried out sweeps involving Muslims leading up to the 2016 election. The Guardian reported a story from a man named Ahmed who declined to provide his last name, but said he's a doctor from Texas. He said the FBI agents showed up at his house on Friday before the election. Ahmed said agents asked him about ISIS because he originally comes from Pakistan, although he is a U.S. citizen and has never had so much as a parking ticket. Ahmed is one of 109 people who took their complaints to the Council of American Relations, or CARE, who either serve to help Muslim relations in the U.S. or are a secret terrorist cell, if you read Breitbart. Ahmed said that agents talked to him for about 45 minutes inquiring about charitable donations, hobbies, his family, and more. Hassan Shibli of CARE Florida said that he received calls from about 12 different states, all describing similar incidents. He fielded 220 calls the day before the election, mostly from South Asian or Afghan men ranging from ages 18 to their 60s, many of whom were doctors and professionals. Former FBI agent Mike Jerman said the news is shocking and shows that the Bureau is intentionally targeting groups by their religious affiliation. For the record, the FBI is legally allowed to perform sweeps of this kind because laws were loosened during the George W. Bush administration under FBI Director Michael Mukasey in 2008. Mukasey's ruling allowed the FBI an assessment period where the agents can conduct investigations without factual information that a threat is posed. Jerman said that these rules will allow the incoming Trump administration broad latitude in who is considered a threat. He said it also makes it more difficult for oversight boards to rein in discriminatory behavior of the intelligence community. Our national politics situation just keeps getting brighter and brighter. So this was Jeff Weber.
And Zaira Olivier for 5 on 20 News.
Next up, Zaira and Stephanie Cott talk local politics.
Good evening and welcome to our new segment, Adelante Tucson, Tucson's new platform for local, national, and international political analysis. I am your host, Saida Olivier, and co-hosting with me today is Stephanie Kant. Today we'll be discussing Inauguration Day in Tucson along with some of the policies proposed by President-elect El Idiota Trump. Later, we'll be joined by Edward Cott Tolentino from Lupe, a grassroots immigrants' rights action committee, who will be discussing the upcoming march and rally that will take place on Inauguration Day, January 20th, in downtown Tucson.
We begin our first segment with a brief summary on the incoming Trump administration's anti-immigrant agenda. One of Trump's main campaign promises is to end DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Under this program, some 750,000 undocumented immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children have been given the opportunity to prosper by guaranteeing them the ability to work legally and obtain a driver's license. In some cases, DACA has also given Dreamers the opportunity to qualify for in-state tuition at public colleges and universities. Just as importantly, DACA also provides a relief from the fear of deportation. This program has dramatically improved job opportunities and living standards for young undocumented people. It has proven to be essential to the health of communities nationwide.
While Trump has not specified when he would begin his promised mass deportations, by eliminating DACA, Dreamers will be driven back into the shadows of society. Furthermore, Trump has promised to deport up to 3 million undocumented immigrants with alleged criminal convictions in his first 100 days in office. Where these criminal statistics come from is still debatable and completely unsourced, much like most of his platform. One of his first and major campaign promises was to build a wall along the Mexican-U.S. border, which, according to El Idiota, the Mexican government would pay for. This outlandish and ridiculous promise was incredibly popular with his supporters, but what is even more outlandish is that they actually believed this was in any way realistic. As we've now seen, Trump is already backtracking on the logistics of this unfeasible construction project. He now plans on asking Congress to approve taxpayer funding for the wall, while promising that Mexico will somehow eventually pay us back.
Trump has also pledged to cut off all federal funding to sanctuary cities. There are about 30 sanctuary cities in the U.S., including some of the country's largest cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, which have already banned city workers and police from enforcing federal immigration policies. Although cities receive relatively little in direct federal funding, the impact this blackmailing tactic will have on sanctuary cities remains to be seen. It is important to note that while in 2012 the city of Tucson proclaimed itself an immigrant-welcoming city, it is far from a legitimized sanctuary city. The Tucson Police Department and the Pima County Sheriff continue to openly collaborate and enforce federal immigration policies under the racist SB 1070 Arizona state law.
Lastly, Trump's immigration program has many similarities to the 2005 House Bill 4437, known as the Sense Burner Bill, which was defeated after more than 1 million people, an overwhelming majority Latinos, hit the streets on May 1st, 2006 in protest of this bill and in support of the legalization of undocumented immigrants. Students walked out of schools, workers left their jobs, and families came out to protest. That is the historical example that we must follow in order to fight back against these new tactics. With that, we would like to turn things over to our guest, Edward from Lupe, here to tell us a little bit about his organization and the upcoming protests happening on Inauguration Day.
So, Edward, if you can tell us about Lupe as an Immigrants' Rights Action Committee.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on. This is an awesome space. Well, Lupe as an Immigrants' Rights Action Committee came about around 2013, 2014, when here in Tucson we were still struggling with the fight for in-state tuition after DACA was passed, and we were also facing what they're called school resource officers, where schools at first, officers in schools were allowed to question students about their immigration status. So around all those issues, Lupe came about with a movement of students, activists, parents, and where we decided to form a group, an organization to promote popular education and political education and mass mobilization to defend the rights of immigrants, undocumented immigrants here in our community.
Okay. And how is Tucson preparing itself for Inauguration Day specifically?
Well, specifically, like we're joining cities around the country who are doing massive mobilizations and protests against this new administration that's coming, that will be inaugurated on the 20th. We're joining a big coalition called the Tucson Occupy Inauguration Coalition, which it includes many different organizations locally and nationally. We have, Tucson Occupy, Black Lives Matter, Derechos Humanos, the Green Party, Socialist Alternative, us as Lupe, and many more progressive organizations here in town that we will be participating, the Tucson Water Protectors. And it will be a huge march that's going to take place again on the 20th. We will be taking off on Congress Street, on the west side of Congress Street from Mercado San Agustin. We would be marching first to the city mayor's office, where Lupe is organizing that portion of the rally, and we will deliver a demand letter to the city mayor requesting them to take, or demanding they take concrete action in defense and to protect undocumented immigrants. After that, we will have speakers, of course, as you two lovely presenters will be speakers. Isabel Garcia, longtime immigrants' rights activist in town, will also be participating as one of our speakers, and Josué Saldivar from Mariposas Sin Fronteras, which is a grassroots immigrants' rights LGBTQ organization that does a lot of work with detained folks in immigration centers. So after the rally at the mayor's office, the march will continue, being led by the Tucson Water Protectors, who are doing a lot of great solidarity work around the North Dakota Access Pipeline issue. And then from there, it would move to the banks, the downtown area where there's the Wells Fargo, we have the Chase, there's also, what's that other bank? Bank of America. So they'll do an action there, and then we will head back down through Congress Street back to the federal courthouse building, where there will be more speakers and music, and the event will conclude there.
And you mentioned that the march, the rally actually, would converge at the mayor's office to present them with a demand letter. How does this demand letter differ from the resolution that City Council passed this past December 20th?
That's a good question, because what we've seen is a lot of folks coming up to us and saying, well, they passed a resolution, it's a sanctuary city, and it's not. That's off the bat. The language they use, they refrain from using the specific term of sanctuary city. I would like to think it's just because they're afraid of, one of the threats by the Trump administration, like y'all said, is to eliminate federal funds from, cities that declare themselves sanctuary cities. But we want to push for that, because just the name itself clearly, says or states where our local politicians are at, and it ties them to the community, to the vulnerable members of our community. So that's one. Municipal ID, which is at the top of our list, our demand letter for a municipal ID, which has already been passed and approved in multiple cities around the country, right? Including New York City, San Francisco, LA, Minnesota, New Haven, Connecticut, and most recently in Phoenix, although we are facing some new legislation that's being passed at the state level that it's looking to block that. But here in Tucson, we're still fighting for that. We believe it's a just struggle because they would greatly protect undocumented immigrants and other vulnerable members of our community, like the homeless, which is a huge issue here in town, women that run away from domestic violence. So vulnerable members will greatly benefit from a municipal ID. Also, requesting and demanding the city does not collaborate with any sort of border construction. You girls talked about that earlier. Or for the Tucson Police Department to receive any sort of funds to train officers or to participate in any sort of home raids or work raids that we might see from the new federal government.
And for those of us who aren't too familiar with municipal IDs, they are basically the first defense against deportation, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Because of laws like SB 1070, once, if an officer believes you have committed some sort of, if they have reasonable suspicion you've committed some sort of criminal activity or are in the process of committing it, once they interact with you, they have the jurisdiction to escalate the situation, bring in Border Patrol to determine your your status. In that resolution you mentioned, the city council in that resolution clearly states that if the person involved in that contact with the officer has a presumptive identification, that should be enough for the police officer not to continue furthering questioning or wanting to determine the immigration status. So it'll be a huge obstacle for the continued implementation of the racist law SB 1070, which is to the detriment of our community.
And of course, the resolution being more of a symbolic gesture as opposed to an ordinance which has a concrete policies that could be implemented to directly deter further immigration raids.
Exactly. So we're looking for something, like you said, concrete. We don't want just words. You all mentioned earlier the city of Tucson declares itself a welcoming city. But what does that mean? We want concrete concrete action from our local officials. So that can mean something, that can have some weight. And
and as some of us know, we are going to be dealing with the legislation in Arizona that are proposing SB 1017 as well as HB 2086, which would defund cities that do start using municipal ID. So the one biggest hurdle that we might have would be with the city not wanting its funding to be cut. They're already having a really hard time balancing the budget, which normally gets balanced on the backs of the poor in Tucson. So what do we say to that? Because also the definition of a sanctuary city is kind of up in the air. Nobody really knows what that means, right? So working with you, I'm assuming this would be kind of a first, a really clear first, and it would be Tucson taking a strong stand. Instead of being reactionary, they're being creative. They're starting first, doing offense rather than defense. Is that what this is for you?
Absolutely. We would, like you're saying, the issue of fundings, it's always been an issue here in the city. But we believe it's more of a matter of justice and equality than a matter of legality. I'm sure there's enough places where they can get some funds, tax the rich, tax corporations like Raytheon. They can come up with the funds and help the most affected, the most super exploited members of our community who deserve the right to live in equality and justice and pursue their dreams.
And I think before we wrap it up, it's evident that it has happened already in Arizona. Phoenix actually was able to successfully pass their One Phoenix ID campaign. So it is possible, and it is possible by balancing the budget correctly.
Absolutely. So, if they can do it, we can do it.
Absolutely. And so just to recap again, the march and the rally is going to be held.
Correct. So that's Friday, January the 20th, starting at 12 p.m. noon on Mercado San Agustin on the west side of Congress Street. The march will end around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There'll be several stops. And if you have any information, you can look Lupe up on Facebook. We have a Facebook, Lupe Tucson. There's also an email, lupetucson@gmail.com. You can contact us through there and get informed of the event.
And your meetings are held for?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so every Monday at 5:30 at the Global Justice Center, we're also having meetings. I'm sure everybody's more than welcome. You can all come by and check out what we're doing, what we're organizing, and how we continue building people's power here in Tucson.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you, Edward, and thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for joining us on our very first segment. Please join us next week on Tuesday.